So welcome to all of you to this side event on the implementation of the declaration. CETIM, a long partner also on this topic with Melik and Rafa in the room. And then we have also the support of coalitions that exist in countries to push for the implementation of the declaration at the national level. We have one coalition called the Friends of the Declaration in Switzerland. We have one also in Luxembourg. And the Academy is also part of a project called RAISE, in which we implement the declaration in 10 countries of the Global South. So it's a huge, lots of partners we have to organize this event, and we hope that it will be key in the process to the implementation of the declaration. We also have very lucky to have with us tonight Nael Lagab from the TIDO committee, and online we have Michael Fakri, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, and we have Fatou Said from the FAO. And so now I leave the floor to the Ambassador of Bolivia, Ambassador McDonald, for chairing this event. Thank you.
Gracias, Christophe. Y quiero darle primero la bienvenida a todos ustedes que están acá en la sala y nos siguen también por el Zoom. Primero agradecer y dar un saludo fraterno a los distinguidos embajadores de Sudáfrica y Luxemburgo que nos acompañan esta tarde, al relator especial sobre el derecho a la alimentación, a la experta del Comité sobre la eliminación de la discriminación contra la mujer, a los representantes y las representantes de la Via Campesina, así como a la Academia de Derecho Internacional Humanitario y de Derechos Humanos de Ginebra por ser los anfitriones de este evento. También agradecemos, por supuesto, al Gobierno de Suiza, a la Oficina de la Alta Comisionada de Naciones Unidas, que son copatrocinadores junto a CETIM, FIAN y el South Center, y por supuesto, como había mencionado, todos los miembros de la Vía Campesina que están aquí. Para nosotros es un gusto trabajar con ustedes. Tengo también el honor de presentar a mi viceministro que está con nosotros mediante el Zoom. Él va a dar las palabras de inauguración de este evento y quiero destacar su participación esta tarde. Es evidente que ya han pasado 4 años desde la adopción de esta importante declaración y Bolivia está muy comprometida junto a nuestros países hermanos presentes acá a impulsar y conocer las buenas prácticas, las lecciones aprendidas y los desafíos que tenemos en la implementación de esta declaración. Así que voy a dar la palabra al embajador Freddy Mamani, el viceministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Bolivia. Viceministro, por favor.
Muchísimas gracias. ¿Me escuchan?
Sí, ¿lo escuchamos?
Muchísimas gracias. Un saludo al hermano embajador de Sudáfrica y al equipo de la misión permanente allá en Ginebra, con quienes tuvimos el honor de liderar este proceso junto al hermano pueblo de la República de Cuba. Agradecemos también al embajador de Luxemburgo por acompañarnos en esta oportunidad y a la Confederación Suiza por su permanente apoyo. Al mismo tiempo, saludar al relator especial del derecho a la alimentación, con quienes hemos compartido varias de estas iniciativas. Un saludo especial a las instituciones como el CETIM, la Academia de Ginebra, el FIAN International, el Centro Sur y de manera especial a Via Campesina, con los cuales hemos tenido una permanente coordinación, un largo trabajo en la construcción y concreción de la Declaración de las Naciones Unidas sobre los Derechos de los Campesinos. Se acaba de presentar el informe mundial sobre las crisis alimentarias. Este indica que 193 millones de personas en 53 países o territorios se encontraban en contextos de crisis con una inseguridad alimentaria aguda o en situaciones peores en 2021 y que casi 40 millones de personas en 36 países experimentaron niveles de emergencia de inseguridad alimentaria aguda a solo un paso de la hambruna mundial. Súbitamente se expande una preocupación generalizada y urgente para responder a las necesidades de seguridad alimentaria y nutrición. Debemos recordar que en 2009 un informe provisional del relator especial sobre el derecho a la alimentación hacía eco del renovado interés por la agricultura desde de la crisis alimentaria mundial de 2007-2008 y que los gobiernos y la comunidad internacional deba aportar importantes decisiones sobre el futuro de la agricultura, debería tomar en el futuro. Ese futuro es hoy precisamente. La crisis no se ha resuelto. Por otro lado, fue la Via Campesina que en los años 2004 o 2006 presentaba denuncias de serias violaciones de derechos humanos en el mundo campesino a la entonces Comisión de Derechos Humanos. En 2008 es la Via Campesina en la que aprueba en sus instancias orgánicas una declaración en la Conferencia Internacional de Derechos de los Campesinos en Yakarta. La Declaración de los Derechos de los Campesinos y otras personas que trabajan en zonas rurales busca cerrar las brechas en la protección de derechos humanos en el mundo rural, incluye la promoción de los derechos de las mujeres en zonas rurales, el derecho al agua, el derecho a una alimentación y nutrición adecuadas y a la soberanía alimentaria, el derecho a las semillas, que es el tema central para los pueblos indígenas y campesinos y aquellas personas que trabajan en zonas rurales, la justicia climática, la agroecología, las empresas y los derechos humanos, el derecho a la tierra y a la digitalización. Hoy nos encontramos ante nuevos retos con los mismos actores. El Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia reafirma su compromiso para con el mundo campesino y hace un llamado a fortalecer esta marcha de los derechos de los campesinos, quienes tienen y puedan contribuir a reducir crisis alimentaria en un mundo atrapado por el mercado, el capital y la especulación. Invitamos a dar pasos sólidos y comprometidos. Hacia adelante se abren nuevos capítulos que esperamos escribir junto con todos ustedes en esta nueva etapa de la implementación de esta declaración que ha sido trabajada a lo largo de 10 años. Se hace necesario discutir las interrelaciones entre la Declaración de los Campesinos y la Declaración de los Derechos de los Pueblos Indígenas para encontrar sinergias colaborativas y de fortalecimiento mutuo y complementario. El tiempo apremia y se da discutir hacia el establecimiento de un órgano subsidiario, sea un mecanismo de expertos o un procedimiento especial, por lo cual debemos iniciar a discutir precisamente con los principales actores y con los países amigos quienes hemos trabajado esta Declaración de los Derechos de los Campesinos. Debemos fortalecer un sistema global para la difusión y promoción de la Declaración, tomando alianzas estratégicas y sostenibles desde la sociedad civil, los movimientos sociales organizados, la academia, las organizaciones no gubernamentales, pueblos y naciones indígenas, originarios y campesinas. Tenemos una ardua labor para demostrar cómo la declaración, fruto de la diplomacia de los pueblos por la vida, puede contribuir al logro de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible a corto y mediano plazo. Necesitamos una sinergia que potencie el alcance de los diferentes instrumentos internacionales a partir del decenio para la agricultura familiar, el seguimiento a los compromisos para los sistemas alimentarios, el diseño de acción sobre nutrición, agua, el desarrollo sostenible, restauración de ecosistemas y el tercer decenio para la erradicación de pobreza. Recordamos que estamos celebrando el 2022 el Año Internacional de la Pesca y la Acuicultura Artesanales y nos preparamos hacia el Año Internacional de los Camélidos en el 2024. Esperamos contribuya a la promoción del patrimonio cultural a través de métodos tradicionales de agricultura, pesca, ganadería y la silvicultura. Por otro lado, este año comenzamos el Decenio Internacional de las Lenguas Indígenas 2022-2032, que servirá para la promoción, protección, revitalización y desarrollo de nuestras lenguas indígenas, pero al mismo tiempo los conocimientos científicos, la ciencia, la interrelación de la ciencia occidental con la ciencia de los pueblos indígenas. Deseo entonces que estas discusiones del día de hoy sean por la vida y den lugar a un segundo momento histórico de la declaración. Recuerden, el futuro es hoy. Hayaya, hermanos, hermanas, quienes están en este evento de paralelo en miras precisamente para la implementación de la Declaración de las Naciones Unidas sobre los Derechos de los Campesinos.
Muchas gracias, señor. Muchas gracias, viceministro, por su presencia y por acompañarnos hoy también. Noto que está conectada la señora Fatuma, sí, de la FAO. No la había saludado, ahora la veo conectada. Muchas gracias por su presencia. Ahora vamos a empezar a escuchar a los embajadores. Vamos a empezar con el embajador Solís Nkosi, de la misión permanente de Sudáfrica aquí en Ginebra, que nos va a compartir algunas experiencias y también va a analizar los desafíos que hemos tenido en la implementación del UNDROP. Embajador, por favor.
Well, thanks very much, Maria, for your kind introduction. And let me thank the organizers, the Geneva Academy, and of course, in collaboration with the distinguished permanent mission of Bolivia and Luxembourg, as well as other distinguished organizations for requesting South Africa to associate with this extremely important event. It is indeed a great honor, a great privilege for me to participate in this event and to share some perspectives at a global and also at a domestic level, as well as to be part and parcel of the efforts to keep this important issue on the agenda, and indeed to use our advocacy and our various tools, including diplomacy, to continue to champion the cause of peasants. So it's a pleasure for me to be here. South Africa reaffirms the importance of the implementation of norms and standards on a range of important thematic issues in the rubric of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, including the declarations on the right to development and the rights of peasants and other people working in rural areas. The adoption of this declaration has given a true meaning to the spirit of the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, namely that all human rights are universal, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. South Africa is in full support of this declaration and other existing declarations addressing important issues such as the right to development. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other People Working in Rural Areas recognizes that peasants and people working in rural areas, including women, youth, and the aging, are migrating to urban areas due to a lack of incentives, the toil of rural life, and more recently, climate change. Compounding these migration patterns are insecure land tenure, discrimination, and the lack of access to productive resources, financial services, and information. The declaration is based on the concern that peasants and rural workers are burdened with environmental degradation and climate change and suffer disproportionately from poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. Madam Moderator, approximately 33.7% of the South African population lives in rural areas and still retain a rural livelihood and are engaged in subsistence farming. These communities are among the poorest in our country. The South African government maintains that family, small-scale, and traditional farming are inextricably linked to its food security. It is in this respect that our government promotes family and small-scale farming as significant drivers of household and domestic food security. The government also recognizes that the state of rural communities in South Africa is a product and constant reminder of dispossession as a result of colonialism and apartheid, leading to high levels of poverty, underdevelopment, and unemployment, with women and children bearing the weight of this brand. As you will recall, the system was designed to strip Black people of their dignity through, amongst others, the systematic theft and dispossession of their land and livestock, while condemning them to a constant supply of cheap labor for the formal economy. Since the advent of democracy in 1994, South Africa is committed to addressing the historical challenges facing the country, including in rural areas, by implementing socio-economic programs to uplift these communities. National rural transformation and agricultural revitalization policies and programs aim to ensure that rural communities begin to truly enjoy their human rights and fundamental freedoms as elaborated in our Constitution. The farming sector is extremely vital to the South African economy and its development, and it is directly linked to food security and poverty reduction. The sector accounted for 5.3% of employees in 2019, while contributing 2.5% to the country's GDP during the pandemic in 2020. The constitutional right to food puts food system and agricultural development firmly on the national development agenda. The government indeed does recognize that subsistence agriculture plays an important role in meeting the needs of residents in rural areas and plans to implement a number of projects that are aimed at increasing jobs, developing skills, and the provision of infrastructure development to support rural economic transformation. The creation of jobs and equitable access to land is critical to alleviating poverty and improving the lives of the rural communities. Madam Moderator, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for the current year, an equivalent of $37 million has been allocated to rural infrastructural development in South Africa. This is a significant amount in the GDP of the country. This allocation will be directed to infrastructure projects, including those related to animal health management, river valley catalytic programs, farmer producer support, as well as the revitalization of rural towns. Together with business, labor, civil society organizations, given that our government has adopted a whole of society approach that includes all stakeholders in agriculture and agro-processing sectors, the government has negotiated and put in place the Agriculture Agro-Processing Master Plan. This process talks directly to Article 10 of the Declaration on the inclusion of people living and working in rural areas in the participation as well as in the decision-making process. The master plan is aimed at redressing the inequality in terms of land ownership because of colonial and apartheid policies that were in place for over 4 centuries. It seeks to ensure that tenure of the security for all, and indeed is guaranteed, and that it empowers citizens to participate in the agricultural economy and ensure integrated rural development. We believe that this intervention will bring us closer to building an inclusive society, making sure that no one is left behind. Allow me to conclude with the few following remarks, that we strongly believe that the participation of the majority of women in the agricultural sector has always been limited to subsistence farming and working in the commercial farms, largely because land access has always been a constraint. Government is currently making a concerted effort to profile women farmers who are producing for the market through what we call Female Farmer of the Year initiative. Further strides in allocating women with farms through other programs have also been implemented. This year, 2022, the government is piloting the Women in Agro-Processing and Agro-Business Program. This is a very important program to ensure that we stimulate the participation of women in the agricultural agro-processing sector, but also we ensure that women are indeed given the due recognition as well as due resources and capacity to ensure that they produce food, not only for their immediate communities, but also for the economy, and that they become active participants, fully integrated into the economy of the country. We are indeed determined to make sure that these initiatives promote, elevate, and enhance women's central role in ridding our country of the scourge of poverty, hunger, and malnutrition, and putting South Africa on a trajectory envisioned in the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as in the letter and the spirit of UNDROP, as well as our National Development Plan 2030. I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for sharing that experience with us, for that important remarks that you do. It is important to know your experience and the advance that you have in the implementation on the UNDROP. And now I'm going to give the floor to Mark Bischler, the permanent representative of the mission of Luxembourg here in Geneva. Ambassador, please.
Thank you. Madam Ambassador, dear Mayra, Excellencies, and dear colleagues and friends. First of all, a warm thank you to the Permanent Mission of Bolivia for hosting this event and for inviting me to participate in what is really a very timely event.
Yeah.
I'm really honored to be here tonight to discuss a topic that's very dear to us, and to do it in the presence of distinguished co-panelists and after having listened to the important message of your minister. I salute also in particular the representatives from the civil society. Many of you have traveled a long distance to be here tonight, including the long distance from Luxembourg for some of you. And I should say that the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants is, of course, the fruit of a positive cooperation between, on the one side, civil society, and on the other side, the states, cooperation that goes back more than 20 years. Luxembourg, together with Portugal, were the only two EU member states to vote in favor of the Declaration on the Rights of Peasants at the UN General Assembly in late 2018. And together with Switzerland, we are among the only states from the global north to support the declaration. And the reasons for this decision come easily to us, and there are a few. Let me list them. First of all, it was a very clear and meaningful request from our national civil society in partnership with Via Campesina, FIAN International, and other platforms that defend the rights of peasants and people living in rural areas. Second reason, the declaration, as a matter of fact, is a powerful tool to bring together in one place all the existing international legal obligations of states to protect the human rights of peasants and rural people. And while it does not create any new rights, it is an important reminder of existing rights and also a reminder of the urgency to fulfill these rights. Third reason, the human rights and the living conditions of these peoples are under enormous stress. And the situation was very bad in 2018 already when the declaration was adopted, but has continued to deteriorate ever since, as the minister pointed to as well. So it has deteriorated, and thus, as a matter of fact, it is vindicating those states that have voted in favor in favor of the declaration, both in the Human Rights Council and in the General Assembly. And finally, the fourth reason, for us to support the declaration makes perfect sense. It makes simply perfect sense, and it is coherent with what we are doing as Luxembourg in other fields, in the field of human rights in general, of course, but then also in the field of development cooperation. As concerns the implementation at the national level, Luxembourg has maybe a number of advantages vis-à-vis other countries. Farmers and agricultural workers lead difficult lives everywhere, but they do have it easier in places with a milder climate and a more solid social protection mechanism. And of course, that does not mean, as we know in Luxembourg also, that does not mean that we cannot improve things. In Luxembourg, civil society organizations representing farmers, but also NGOs working for human rights and the development cooperation have partnered and set up a group of friends of the United Nations Declaration. And Mrs. Michel Perrin-Taillard, who I see in the audience, and Mr. Colin Robertson and Ms. Marine Lefebvre, they are here tonight to represent this group of friends in Luxembourg. As concerns the implementation on the international level, the picture is maybe more mixed. The complex and interlocking crisis that the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, and Secretary General Antonio Guterres continue to warn us about, they threaten peasants, people living in rural areas, and indigenous people to a very high degree indeed. And the climate crisis, environmental degradation and pollution, the food, the energy, and the finance crises, the continued COVID-19 pandemic, and other public health threats. All of these endanger the livelihoods, but also the lives of the peoples protected by the United Nations Declaration. We follow and we support the work of the UN's Global Crisis Response Group on food, energy, and finance, with some trepidation, I must say. The unjustified and illegal war of aggression that Russia is waging against Ukraine already has grave effects on food security worldwide. It will once again be peasants and people in rural areas who we all rely on to produce our food, who will be among the hardest hits. Of course, this is very unjust. One element that links all of these crises together is, as we fear, a severe erosion of human rights and a regression of democracy that we are unfortunately witnessing across the world. Human rights defenders are among the first victims. This has been amply documented even at this and at the last session of the Human Rights Council, and the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Reem Al-Salem, has dedicated her latest report to attacks against indigenous women human rights defenders. The Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, Mary Lawlor, has written about defenders targeted because they are investigating corruption. Finally, the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression has written on attacks targeting journalists for their investigative work. These are only 3 recent reports that highlight continued pressure on civic space. The Special Rapporteur on the right to food, Michael Fakhri, will be speaking in a moment. Luxembourg has most certainly appreciated his focus on the rights of farmers in his latest report to the Human Rights Council. And we are working also closely with the United Nations Working Group on Business and Human Rights to make progress on the issue of the responsibility of private companies for human rights. Going forward, I believe that it is time that all member states who support the United Nations Declaration on the Rights to Peasants should join forces and work together to advance it, both at the Human Rights Council and at their various national levels. We need to use all the means at our disposal to do so. First, technical cooperation and capacity building. The Office of the High Commissioner, but also UN entities like UNDP and FAO play a particular role in that. Another essential element is the monitoring and public advocacy for human rights compliance with special procedures, mandates holders, and treaty bodies like CEDAW or the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, as my colleague from South Africa has pointed to already. So I am pleased that Luxembourg can stand side by side with all of these actors, as well as with Bolivia, Switzerland, and also South Africa in our support to civil society for the fulfillment of the rights of peasants worldwide. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador, also for raising so many important points. And as you said, it's a construction for many actors, and we will be engaging in the process forward. Thank you so much. Now, we're going to hear from Michael Fakhri, the Special Rapporteur on the Right of Food, the relevance of the UNDROP in guiding responses to the food and climate crisis, and recommendations from its implementation from the mandate's perspective. Mr. Fakhri, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and thank you, everyone. First, I want to start with a warm thank you to the Permanent Mission of Bolivia for gathering us all together here. And I apologize, I can't be there in person. Events like this are crucial. I spend most of my time thinking about the food crisis. So as many people here know, hunger, malnutrition, and famine were on the rise since 2015. And then the pandemic made everything worse. And the Russian invasion of Ukraine triggered the latest shock. But really, world food systems have been in a state of constant crisis and recovery for at least 80 years, if not longer. So a gathering like this is so important, and I find it very refreshing that we're all here together to talk about UNDROP. And I really want to echo a lot of what the ambassadors from South Africa, from Luxembourg, and the Vice Minister from Bolivia have said today, and add my perspective. But let me begin that UNDROP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas, is one of the most important tools we have in our hands to tackle the food crisis right now. And it represents the spirit of how we should continue working together. And we've already heard it today, where the energy and the power comes from the people, from social movements, from peasants and other people working in rural areas. And it's the leadership of governments like Bolivia, like South Africa, like Luxembourg, amongst others, who then take this popular energy and have turned it into political and legal action. In my work promoting the right to food, I have found that the UN Declaration provides a way to analyze food systems from a human rights perspective. And it creates a framework that enables multilateral cooperation and action. So in the remainder of my time, I'll explain what this means. I'll explain what it means to understand the food crisis as a human rights issue. I'll explain the role of the UN Declaration that it plays in framing the issue in human rights terms and understanding food in terms of food systems. And I'll conclude with a tactical suggestion of how to think about the UN Declaration in relation to the right to food. What was made very clear during the pandemic, that if peasants, workers, fishers, pastoralists, and indigenous peoples, and especially women in all of these groups, go hungry, we all go hungry. Our food systems stop working. What that means is that in order to build a just and biodiverse food system, governments must respect, protect, and most importantly, fulfill the rights of peasants, broadly defined, workers, and indigenous peoples, with a focus on women. The UN Declaration provides a framework for doing just that. The UN Declaration spells out the importance of equitable access to things like seeds, land, and water as a matter of necessity and entitlement, not privilege. The UN Declaration reiterates the right to food, the right to water, the right to health, and the right to a healthy environment. And it captures, the UN Declaration captures popular social waves and growing international political energy with a strong reference to food sovereignty. In this way, the UN Declaration gives us a means of understanding food systems as made up of a complex array of peoples and communities who hold legal entitlements and governments who have obligations. This is what makes up a food system, is that relationship between people and governments. What I really appreciate about the UN Declaration is how it complements and connects to other instruments, such as the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, International Labor Organization treaties, and CEDAW. This leads me to my final point about how the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas can relate to the right to food. The challenge with human rights is, even though all human rights are indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated, and I welcome those remarks by His Excellency, the Ambassador from South Africa, the challenge is there's no predetermined framework that tells us how to organize these different rights and instruments together. There's no roadmap on how to decide which rights should you start with in order to most effectively activate all the rights. To me, how to connect different rights is not so much a technical or a legal question, but a tactical question. I think the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas is one of the most important legal advancements in decades. But I think also its power remains untapped. And that untapped power lies in how it can enable alliances and new relationships of solidarity. And with this in mind, I'll turn to social movements. We saw in India how the power of solidarity, when a new alliance between farmers and workers defeated pro-corporate agricultural laws. We saw in Scotland how the right to food brought together all elements of society together when a grassroots campaign succeeded in passing a good food bill in Scottish Parliament, enhancing food sovereignty in Scotland. And now we have to keep in mind, labor unions, they like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, but we also have to remember workers have over 100 years of ILO treaties. That is their bedrock. Indigenous peoples also like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants. But the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is also incredibly powerful, and it's gaining significant legal application. Women, of course, find CEDAW and General Comment number 34 very useful. I look forward to hearing more about that today, because it highlights discrimination against women. And to me, it also serves a reminder of the power, the unfortunate power of patriarchy in our food systems. I'll add that the right to food is politically in play right now. It is being taken up by a wide range of movements and governments, more so than it was 2 years ago, and definitely more than it was at the UN Food Systems Summit that I found quite useless 2 years ago. Therefore, my suggestion is that the right to food can provide the connective tissue between all of these instruments and amongst all these constituents. The right to food can start with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, but also weave together the rights of indigenous peoples, ILO treaties, and CEDAW in a way that enables a just transition to food systems that fulfills everyone's human rights. I look forward to working more deeply with Bolivia, and I invite South Africa and Luxembourg to reach out to my office so we can find ways of collaborating together. And next time in Geneva, maybe I look forward to meeting the group of friends around the UN Declaration, and any government that's really willing to work together. I look forward to a closer collaboration. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, Mr. Packer, for those insightful words. And yes, indeed, we have a lot of work to do, and we are going to look forward to work with you. Thank you for your engagement. I'm going to give now the floor to Ms. Fatouma Said from the FAO office, please, if she is connected on Zoom. Ms. Said, please.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, dear participants, I'm really pleased and honored to be here with you, and a special thanks to the permanent mission of Bolivia to the UN. Here today, I would like to share a perspective of FAO in relation to the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas, especially in this current context of multidimensional crisis. I think we are at a very critical moment to transform our agri-food system in order to end global hunger and malnutrition in all its forms. I mean, many of the previous speakers have already underlined that the number of hungry people is on the rise. And as the pandemic has been sweeping the world, halting economic activities, disrupting supply chain, it has also pushed 811 million people struggling to find food. Unfortunately, again, among those, 80% of the world poorest and food insecure live in rural areas. Most of them are small-scale family producers who face many difficulties accessing productive resources, opportunities, and markets. So just to say that all these data confirm that our food system is increasingly facing complex challenges. Moreover, the crises are amplifying the inequalities, again, primarily affecting the most vulnerable groups of the society, the poorest people, including and specifically the family farmers, including peasants, fisherfolk, pastoralists, indigenous people, traditional communities, women and youth. And they are particularly exposed to this current situation. But at the same time, this multiple crisis is offering us an occasion for a joint and sincere reflection aiming at the most appropriate solution to strengthen and build resilience while leveraging our local producer to offer solutions. In this context, family farmers have a significant role since they are key to building a resilient food system, ensuring food and nutrition security and sustainable management of natural resources. This important role that the family farmers and their organization play of providing contextualized and comprehensive solutions responding to the challenges created by the crisis has been reconfirmed during the year of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have witnessed emerging alternative logistical and food distribution initiatives by family farmers, organizations, and cooperatives. Initiatives directly linking producers and consumers by applying new forms of organization or new technologies. Strengthening and supporting well-functioning family farmers organizations with the involvement of youth and women is therefore critical for a sustainable food system. FAO strongly supports the development of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Peasants. The declaration gives, as it has been said, a global recognition for the role played by family farmers, peasants, and all small producers across the world in terms of food security and sustainable food system. In particular, FAO has supported the negotiation process in Geneva as active member of the open-end intergovernmental working group on the rights of peasants and other people working in rural areas. The Director General of FAO has personally expressed his support to the process at various occasions. It is worth mentioning that the declaration is strictly linked to the most relevant principle and guidelines adopted by the Committee on World Food Security and by FAO bodies, with a particular reference to the voluntary guideline on responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forests in the context of the national food security, or to the small-scale fisheries guideline with other international conventions, such as the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. In this regard, FAO has taken concrete action to address a number of issues outlined in the declaration, such as tenure rights or access to natural resources through implementing the previously mentioned global applicable international instrument. And in this context, less than 1 year ago, the UN General Assembly recognized the UN Decade of Family Farming as a suitable mechanism to support the effective contextualization of the international tools and guidelines in support of family farmers as the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas, among other global policies instruments. The UN Decade of Family Farming and its Global Action Plan promote the use of existing international instruments in a complementary and comprehensive manner for the support of family farming. The decade also aimed to reinforce the implementation of various existing tools and concepts based on the universal principle of human rights. When we look at when we give a detailed look at the content of the Declaration of the Rights of Peasants and the Global Action Plan of the UN Decade of Family Farming, one will find several issues which are mentioned in both. These topics include, as it has been said by the previous speaker, among other, access to land, gender, seed, the matter of association, participation in decision-making and marketing. And I believe that the UN Decade of Family Farming provides an excellent opportunity to advance the implementation of UNDROP, since it aims at developing policy intervention for the support of family farmers, therefore also for peasants in accordance with the multidimensional nature and contribution of family farming to a sustainable food system. Furthermore, the decade offers a solid space to share experience and good practices, create synergies, and stimulate strong partnership, resulting in a transformational change at national level and committee, and also targeting the Agenda 2030, what the Agenda 2030 calls for. Just to give you some example, between 2019 and 2021, National Action Plan for Family Farmers were approved in 10 countries. The drafting phase was reached in 14, and considerable progress was made in mobilizing actors to draft such plans in 27 countries. More than 2,600 relevant actors have been involved in the dialogue process or platform, including 1,850 family farmers organizations and federation. This is to highlight the paramount contribution of the UN Decade of Family Farming to the implementation of Article 15 of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Peasants, and in particular in realizing the rights of peasants to participate in decision-making process on food and agriculture policies along the entire policy cycle. For monitoring purpose, the Global Action Plan of Family Farming framework, a Family Farming Decade, use a number of indicators which are strictly linked to the SDGs framework. By interconnecting the implementation and monitoring process of the Family Farming Decade with the UNDROP implementation, we will be able to highlight the extraordinary result that can be achieved when working with family farmers and peasant farmers. Dear participants, distinguished guests, FAO strongly supports the Declaration of the Rights of Peasants and people working in rural areas, and is looking forward to continue a close collaboration with La Via Campesina and other civil society organizations, collaboration to urge the development and implementation of adequate policies for the full realization of these rights. I thank you.
Thank you, Mrs., for those important words and the information that you share. Of course, FAO is a very important player in this in the future endeavors for the UNDROP. And now I'm going to give the floor to Nael Agaf, ex-member from the CEDAW. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm representing the Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and at the same time, I was the chair of the working group responsible and mandated to draft the General Recommendation 34 on the rights of rural women. CEDAW are the only legally binding instrument dealing with women's human rights, reserved one of its lengthiest articles, Article 14 of the Convention to Rural women. Article 14 is the only provision in an international human rights treaty that specifically pertains to rural women. However, all rights under the convention apply to them. Article 14 must be interpreted in the context of the convention as a whole. When reporting to us, to the committee, state parties should address all articles in relation to the rights of rural women and girls, meaning the articles concerning basic social services, the article concerning non-discrimination, political participation, etc., etc. As experts, we realized during our discussion of periodic reports of state parties that rural women face challenges, difficulties, and above all, different forms of discrimination, even in developed countries. For the above-mentioned reasons, we decided to establish a working group mandated to draft a general recommendation on Article 14, and I had the honor of presiding it. Let me first clarify that a general recommendation is a soft law aiming at providing guidance to state parties on the implementation of their obligations with respect to a specific article of the convention or subject relating to an article. All general recommendations adopted by CEDAW apply to rural women, as well as recommendations concerning the other 15 articles of the convention. For instance, the general recommendation 25 of temporary special measures apply to rural women because we are asking countries, state parties coming to present a periodic report to us to endorse temporary special measures for the sake of improving the situation of human rights of rural women. For instance, the right to political participation, the right to health, the right to education. This is an example. 34, General Recommendation 34 is very linked on climate, 37, I'm sorry, on climate change is very much linked to the rights of rural women. The General Recommendation of 38 on trafficking in persons is important for the safety of rural women because rural women in some parts of the world, especially in my continent, in Africa, can face all forms of exploitation. Among them, the question of the exploitation of domestic workers, sexual exploitation, every form of exploitation, because there are sometimes having difficulties, there are sometimes illiterate, and for that reason, sometimes they are migrants, so they can be easily exploited and facing trafficking in person. Of course, the last general recommendation we are about to adopt, inshallah, in next October, is the one on indigenous people, and it's very much linked to the rights of rural persons. If we start by tackling the legislative part of the convention, the general recommendation, our General Recommendation 34 recommends state parties to adopt effective laws, policies, regulations, programs, and procedures to ensure the full advancement of rural women and the enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms on a basis of equality with men. We can move and consider other part of the general recommendation. We'll find parts dealing, as I told you, with temporary special measures, with public life, with nationality, basic social service, and the most important thing, as Ambassador of South Africa has mentioned, because I was also Ambassador to South Africa, Botswana, and Lesotho many years ago, the question of access to land, inheritance of land, access to water, access to new technologies, access to seeds. This is extremely important. Of course, we are asking that rural women had to benefit from all forms of development in the country, can have access to credit, to integration and participation in new development programs and strategies. Well, the question which was raised I think, in the concept note was how CEDAW and our General Recommendation 34 can help implementing the declaration. Of course, we worked on various steps as for the preparation of the General Recommendation and also the declaration on the right of the peasant and people living and working in rural areas together, but we finalized the General Recommendation in 2016. Well, the declaration on rural people and people working and living in rural areas needs, of course, people working, juristes de formation are going to say they need a political will. And of course, I'm very much frustrated that the important countries preaching human rights and giving us lessons on human rights are not endorsing such a document. It's very sad, because now that all the world is facing a crisis, a food crisis, and linking food crisis to security of states, my own country, Egypt, of course, is suffering a lot because we are a net food importing country. So the question is linked to basic human rights. It's linked to the right to life, not just the right to food, but the right to life. So it is important that the whole community engage in supporting this declaration and also the declaration on indigenous people. When I started my previous life as a career diplomat, I started working with the mother of indigenous people, Erika Dice, the one who was behind the declaration. It was many, many years ago, declaration on indigenous people, and even she sent to me her book, and it's good to remember her and remember what she has done for indigenous people. So for the implementation, to make it short and brief, we need political will. Nevertheless, we are still here as a legally binding instrument. CEDAW is here and ready to work on this issue. We are working for women. Women are half of the world, half of the rural population. But what applies to rural women can apply easily to rural men if we push the right of rural women, and this is what we are doing for every state coming to us. We are doing kind of progress to rural men, and this way we are directly and indirectly supporting the declaration. Let me try to summarize. We are dealing with half of the rural population. We are acknowledging their rights will help and impact directly on the rights and situation of men in rural areas. As I told you, CEDAW is legally binding instrument. State parties are coming to CEDAW to present their periodic reports dealing and tackling Article 14. We are also asking about the General Recommendation 34 as a roadmap and about its implementation. As I have previously mentioned, all GRs apply to rural women, especially climate change, trafficking in person, and the newcomer, the indigenous people. It is important when working on awareness raising among pressure groups, and especially the work of the civil society is highly appreciated. Dealing with the rights of peasants, to flag as well CEDAW Convention and Article 14, and especially the General Recommendation 34 of 2016. I'm reiterating the importance of having as many countries as we can. I'm very much impressed by the work of the Special Rapporteur on the right to food, very much impressed, and really the work of FAO as an agency working on the implementation of the declaration. This is an operational part of the activity, and it is most welcome. By working on programs, strategies, the implementation, we are pushing ahead the implementation of the declaration. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gav, for the important points that you raised and highlight. Of course, the role of women, especially women in rural areas, and the fact that we have to talk about the issues that's very important for them, us, as the access to land, water, to access to seed, and those kind of issues that are very key in this in the implementation also for the declaration. And as you said, this declaration should be supported more for more countries. We're working on that, but still we thank and we appreciate the work of all the missions, the countries that are supporting us in this civil society that is in this work with us. And of course, we are going to give now the floor to Morgan Oding, the coordinator, the general coordinator of Via Campesina. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you very much. First, on behalf of Via Campesina, please let me start by expressing a very warm thanks to Bolivia, because this country has played a very key role in all the process that led us to the adoption of UNDROP. So yeah, thank you very much. And then of course also to South Africa, Luxembourg, Switzerland for also participating in organizing this event. And more generally speaking, we wish to express great gratitude to all countries and international institutions which supported the adoption of UNDROP and which now work towards its implementation, and in particular, the Office of the High Commissioner and the Special Rapporteur on the right to food and FAO. Just to say that for Via Campesina and peasants all over the world, the 17th of December 2018 has been a very important day. We are humble people, and to see the recognition of our rights has been an extremely important moment. For peasants' organization, your commitment for the rights of peasants and other people working in rural area is a reason for hope. Your commitment is even more important now that we peasants, we need to cope with huge challenges such as climate change, water scarcity, inflation, and the rise of the cost of production. But we are aware that there is still a long way to go for these rights to be fully implemented. As soon as 2018, all our member organizations within Via Campesina started to work to make UNDROP known to peasants and to rural people. We had the declaration translated into more than 40 languages, as well as to comics, because we know that the first thing to do is we want peasants to know about this declaration. We want peasants to know that we do have rights and all rights have been recognized. So this kind of documents, for us, it's been really important to translate the UNDROP into words and images that can be really understood by all the peasants and the people in the rural area. During lockdowns, we organized virtual trainings also to make UNDROP known and understood, and so that farmers can really also claim for their rights. And as soon as we could go outside, we started to organize peasants' rights tours to go from villages to villages and promote the UNDROP. We also presented it to members of parliament to ask them to translate the UNDROP into national laws. And we used the UNDROP into plea trials to defend our rights. We were delighted to see the commitment of several states and international institutions to incorporate UNDROP in the national laws. In Nepal and Chile, legal and constitutional processes are partly inspired by UNDROP. As we heard before, FAO has integrated UNDROP as a key element in the UN Decade for Family Farming. The Office of High Commissioner on Human Rights managed to create links between peasants' rights and other rights, such as rights for environment and rights for workers. So, of course, we need to admit that the pandemic did not make our work any easier. But the disorganization of food systems linked with COVID and now the food crisis that hit so many countries show how important and urgent it is to continue this work towards the implementation of peasants' rights. It's time now to move forward. It's time to move together towards food sovereignty, agroecology, popular feminism, and peasants' rights. So this is the reason why La Via Campesina welcomes the initiative that your countries have taken to work towards the creation of a new specific special procedure for the implementation of UNDROP. We do need tools and follow-up mechanisms to promote, defend, and enforce peasant rights. Special procedures can support the exchange of good practices between countries. It can also help to monitor the situation in countries and open the path for improvement. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know the importance in the current context of protecting the rights of peasants and other people working in rural areas. Peasants and small-scale farmers produce the food for more than 70% of the world population, and still we suffer discrimination, high level of poverty, and very often hunger. The realization of peasants' rights is not only in the interest of peasants, it is a condition for the well-being. And here I would use the word from Bolivia, el buen vivir, of the world humanity. In the face of climate change, biodiversity crisis, and resource scarcity, the implementation of UNDROP is a necessity for the future of humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those words and very important words, and also a key partner for us to give this momentum to improve the implementation for the UNDROP. And as you mentioned, the part of the socialization and the appropriation of the UNDROP, it's very important point that we have to work on. And now I'm going to open the floor maybe for some comments, some questions that you have. We have the South Center here. Fernando, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'd like to get the act because I've been involved in the process for many years, not as many as Christophe and Nelly, but I've been involved about from the beginning of the process. And I would like to express my appreciation to the Mission of Bolivia to organize this meeting because I think it's very timely to promote again the implementation of the UNDROP. Also, I would like to thank the speakers because you have highlighted many of the aspects about the riches of the UNDROP. I agree fully with you. UNDROP is a highly rich instrument, it's a highly rich tool to implement many rights of the people, of peasants and people living in rural areas. It is related to water, but it goes beyond the human right to water, drinking water. It touches upon the water as livelihood to promote the livelihoods of the people in the rural areas. Also, it touches upon food security, biodiversity, and many other areas. Women's rights. It's very rich, actually. And this is why from now, I am working in the international organization, intergovernmental organization, and I work together with also many colleagues from civil society organizations to promote the implementation. Implementation is the challenge now, and we need to work in the Human Rights Council. And the question would be, what is the landscape of support for a new procedure in the Human Rights Council? But I will just leave this question open because I think we need to keep working together to make it real. I just want to stop here, but thank you very much for this activity.
Thank you. We have the representative of Cuba, please, for a comment, maybe.
Thanks. Well, first of all, I would like to thank
especially Bolivia and the other colleagues. Second, I would like to translate our commitment with this initiative and the actions that we can do together to train the force and to continue developing this. I think that there are many challenges that we have to face. One of them, well, the climate change, as you mentioned. But the other that we could mention is the coercive unilateral measures that impact in the right to food and impact even in the right to life. Well, you know, the Cuba is it is a priority for Cuba work in this topic. Even one of the first measures taken by the Cuban Revolution when it started was giving the land to peasants and giving the land to men and women who really work for it. And it's a priority for my country. It's a priority for Cuba. This initiative and to continue. You can count on the Cuban support, and you can count with our commitment to work together. Thanks.
Thank you. Maybe one more from the floor, and then one other from Zoom. We have like a lot of people in Zoom. They say more than 70 people are connected. So yeah.
I'll just say a word and then give it to Milun. Just to say that with the Academy and the CETIM, FIAN and La Via Campesina, we are creating a new website to promote the declaration, because now the information is a bit everywhere, but there will be a website in French, English, and Spanish with all the information about the implementation of the declaration, we hope in the world. Just today also, we submitted a contribution to the working group negotiating the Convention on the Right to Development. And this contribution was to include an article on the rights of peasants, because there was nothing on the rights of peasants. So we are hoping that an article can still be included on the Convention on the Right to Development. And lastly, same question that Fernando asked about having a new special procedure. I think that from the beginning, from La Via Campesina and partners, it's one of the key objectives to have a new special rapporteur, because we know that many of them, the other special rapporteurs are including the declaration in their work, but it's not the same. And I've had the privilege to work for 8 years with the special rapporteur on the right to food, the first one who got the money. And you could see that it made a huge difference to have a special rapporteur on this topic, and it would also make a difference to have one on the rights of peasants. Thank you.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm Milun Kothari. I'm a human rights scholar activist from India, and I was formerly Special Rapporteur on Housing. I had a couple of questions on, most peasants that we are talking about in terms of organizing work in the informal sector. So the question for the panelists, also for the Special Rapporteur, is how do we bring them into the formal system? And is that wise? I mean, indigenous people have actually found that they've lost a lot when they're brought into the formal legal system. And the peasants also, because they don't have that, are facing evictions and displacement. This was recognized in General Recommendation number 34, and particular impact on women. So there's this whole question of security. And I wonder how we move to that, especially when we are facing new challenges. And I just wanted to quickly mention two developments in India, which are quite positive, which is, one is that we have, in addition to what Michael mentioned about the organizing on the ground, we have something called Homestead Act. And this is very important because it brings together the right to food and the right to housing, which is very important for small peasants, because if you just have a little place to farm and you don't have a place to live, it's very difficult, especially also for families. And the second is the very important contribution being made today by women's cooperatives that are working in a number of states, including in Andhra Pradesh, who are working also on organic farming. And they're very powerful cooperatives with thousands of farmers. So there are these kinds of examples, but I just wanted to stress this issue of the problems that peasants face because their rights to security and their rights to land are not recognized. But do we want them to be recognized? That's the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And now for the time, I'm going to take just one question from Zoom. Lo voy a responder en español, si no les molesta. Es dedicado para nosotros, para Bolivia, y ver cómo vamos a impulsar un mecanismo o cómo avanzamos en la implementación y el engagement con la oficina de la alta comisionada, tal vez en la implementación de UNDROP. Bueno, para nosotros siempre va a ser muy importante trabajar en conjunto con los diferentes países, con la sociedad civil, con la Via Campesina, CETIM, FIAN, todos los partners que hemos podido trabajar durante los años de negociación y por supuesto mucho antes de este tiempo de negociación que hemos tenido. Y para nosotros es muy importante, por supuesto. Is a translation?
I'm not receiving the interpretation.
But I can say it in English, though. It's okay. Don't worry. Well, as we say, there was one question on Zoom, and to see how we're going to move forward and to see that we can work on a mechanism to the implementation for the UNDROP. Of course, we will trust in you and your countries and the friend countries, the core group, and all the countries that want to support us, the civil society, the CEDAW, all the mechanisms that we have, and the civil society, of course, that want to support this process. It would be a very ambitious step to move forward to the implementation. And we were going to move forward, of course, and to see how can we work on this. It's very important, as many of you and many of the speakers said today. This is a momentum. We are facing multiple crises, and food security is a key issue for all the world. And to support the rights of peasants and other people who work in rural areas, that must be a commitment for all countries. And the view of Bolivia is always to engage with the mechanisms of protection of human rights in a positive way, a constructive dialogue, cooperation, solidarity among countries, and that will be always our approach. So I would like to thank all of you for being here, CEDAW, the Via Campesina, South Africa, Luxembourg, CETIM, FIAN, South Center, Cuba, and all people, the Via Campesina that's here. It's very important for us. This is our first event since 2018, and we're going to move forward to see how can really the socialization of the UNDROP and the implementation is very key and important issue for us. So thank you so much, and have a good night, everyone.